Joe went on with his story. "You see, Charlie," he said, "not so very long ago, there were thousands of people working for Mr. Willy Wonka. Then one day, all of a sudden, Mr. Wonka had to ask every single one of them to leave, to go home and never come back." "But why?" said Charlie. "Because of spies." "Spies?" "Yes. All of the other chocolate makers, you see, have begun to grow very jealous of the wonderful sweets that Mr. Wonka was making, and they started sending in spies to steal his secret recipes. The spies took jobs in the Wonka factory, pretending they were ordinary workers, and while they were there, each one of them found out exactly how a certain special thing was made." "And did they go back to their own factories and tell?" asked Charlie. "They must have," said Grandpa Joe, "because soon after that, Fickle Grubber's factory started making an ice cream that would never melt, even in the hottest sun. Then Mr. Prodnose's factory came out with a chewing gum that never lost its flavour, however much you chewed it. And Mr. Slugworth's factory started making sugar balloons that you could blow up to huge sizes before you popped them with a pin and gobbled them up. And so on and so on. And Mr. Willy Wonka tore his beard and shouted, 'This is terrible. I shall be ruined. There are spies everywhere. I shall have to close the factory.' But he didn't do that," said Charlie. "Oh yes, he did," said Grandpa Joe. "He took all the workers and told them he was sorry, but he'd have to let them go home. Then he shut the main gates and fastened them with a chain, and suddenly Wonka's giant factory became silent and deserted. The chimneys stopped smoking, the machines stopped whirring, and from then on not a single chocolate or sweet was made. Not a soul went in or out, and even Mr. Willy Wonka himself disappeared completely." "Months and months went by," said Grandpa Joe. "But the factory remained closed, and everybody said, 'Poor Mr. Willy Wonka, he was so nice, and he made such marvellous things. But he's finished now. It's all over.' Then something astonishing happened. One day, early in the evening, thin columns of white smoke were seen coming out of the tops of the tall chimneys of the factory. People in the town stopped and stared. 'What's going on?' they cried. 'Somebody's lit the furnaces. Mr. Wonka must be opening up again.' They ran to the gates expecting to see them wide open, and Mr. Wonka standing there to welcome his workers back. But no, the great iron gates were still locked and chained as securely as ever, and Mr. Wonka was nowhere to be seen. 'But the factory is working,' the people shouted. 'Listen, you can hear the machines, they're whirring again, and you can smell the lovely melting chocolate in the air.' Grandpa Joe leaned forward and laid a long bony finger on Charlie's knee, and he said softly, 'But the most mysterious of all, Charlie, were the shadows in the windows of the factory. The people standing on the street outside could see small dark shadows moving around behind the frosted glass windows.